Okay, welcome to the video. This will be a series of videos on case studies of individuals who've been to court and gone through the criminal justice process as a result of a false allegation. So I'm just going to show you a number of articles spread over a number of years following this case, the case of former fireman David Bryant, who was jailed for 6 years for raping a schoolboy almost 40 years ago. Now this dates to 2014, January 2014, and this is the Daily Echo, the Bournemouth Daily Echo. So I'm going to read through these articles and you'll see the progression of the case and how the false accuser ruined this individual's life. Former retained firefighter David Bryant was jailed for 6 years today after being found guilty of raping a schoolboy in Christchurch almost 40 years ago. The 63-year-old was silent as he was led from the courtroom, watched by family members and friends in the public gallery and also by his victim, Danny Day. Bear in mind this was a false accuser, and we'll learn about that later, who had waived his right to anonymity. Sentencing him at Bournemouth Crown Court, Judge Samuel Wiggs said he was jailing him for the least possible time he was allowed, reduced from a starting point for the offence of 10 years imprisonment. It is difficult to think of anybody who has shown over the years a stronger sense of civic and public duty than you have, he said. It may be, as your counsel said, that you were trying to repay in some way what you did on that day almost 40 years ago. Now bear in mind, he did nothing on that day. It was a false accusation. But this is the judge talking to him during sentencing. During the trial, the court heard that Bryant and a fellow retained firefighter, Dennis Goodman, who is now deceased, had befriended Mr. Day, the false accuser, and invited him to play darts with them at Christchurch Fire Station during the 1970s. During the incident in question, the victim, then aged 14, was held down over a table by the pair, who then took it in turns to rape him while having sex with each other. Mr. Day said his decision to go to the police was partly inspired by the Jimmy Savile revelations. Judge Wiggs said he believed Bryant, then 26, was strongly influenced in the crime by Mr. Goodman. On that occasion, the only one in your life, you committed a very serious criminal offence, he said. Now, again, bear in mind, and we'll find this as we read the other articles, that this was a falsified offence, a false allegation. But this is how people talk to you in court. You're treated as a criminal, and it would be a very difficult and stressful time for yourself and also for the family members. And it was very stressful for his wife, as we'll find out. The court heard that more than 30 letters from friends, family and former colleagues of Bryant had been written to the judge, and one of the writers, former Dorset Chief Fire Officer Martin Chapman, addressed the court in mitigation. Over the past 18 years I've known him, Bryant, to be considerate, courteous and dependable, he said. I was stunned by this conviction. This is not the man I have known. Again, bear in mind, he's been falsely accused. Mr. Day said he was very disappointed with the sentence. Mr. Day is the accuser, the false accuser. And again he goes on to comment, I don't think justice has been fully served in this case, he said. It is as though, because he has led an unblemished life since then, that somehow makes up for it. But I do still want to encourage anybody who has experienced this sort of thing to come forward. It can't be left alone. I also want to thank the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, who did a sterling job in effect, setting up the fire officer, the defendant, and to say that I think this incident has no bearing on the fire service itself. You'll find that several years later, Danny Day is suing the fire service as well for damages. Bryant of Christchurch still denies his guilt. He was also ordered to sign the Sex Offenders Register for life. During the sentencing hearing, the court heard evidence that Bryant's accomplice, Mr. Goodman, had a prior conviction for a sexual crime against children. Prosecutor Rob Griffiths said Goodman had been convicted of inappropriately touching boys aged 13 to 15 through their clothes while play fighting at the Christchurch fire station. He said Goodman was fined for this offence, which took place some years after the rape. Now, okay, so that is an article 2014. Let's move to an article February 2017. So I didn't find an EDB article reporting on the release, but this is a few years later. Fire chief jailed after being falsely accused of historic child sex abuse blames police for his wife's death. So again, February 2017. A fire chief jailed after being falsely accused of historic child sex abuse has blamed police for his wife's death at the age of 54 because of the stress caused by his wrongful conviction. Lynn Bryant has died just 6 months after her husband was finally freed after spending almost 3 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Her husband, David, from Dorset, broke down in tears as he told the Telegraph of his wife's deep distress at the police's continued refusal to apologise for its bungled investigation into the false claims made by a serial liar and fantasist. So again, I can testify to the stress that not only the defendant goes through, the accused, but also family members. So my mother and father were also aware from day one of my arrest, what was going on. My case went on for 3 years. It was enormously stressful for my mother. My father also got roped in to the prosecution case. He found it also very debilitating and stressful. And it created a lot of unhappiness, not only within our lives, but further afield. Continuing, Mr. and Mrs. Bryant suffered a living hell after Danny Day, who suffered serious mental health problems, went to police in 2012, falsely claiming the fire chief, with an unblemished record, had raped him on one occasion at a local fire station 35 years ago when he was 14. The case was finally quashed by the Court of Appeal, which declared Mr. Bryant innocent in July, so that would be 2016. But Dorset Police has still refused to apologise. Mr. Bryant told the Telegraph, "I think the stress killed her," his wife. "You couldn't prove it, but it stands to reason that all the stress cannot have done her any good." And I think this is a perfectly reasonable claim to make, having lived through it 3 years myself and seen it with my family members. If Dorset Police had given us a timely apology, that would have helped Lynn. That is all we really wanted. What really upset her was that we asked for the paperwork on the police case, and they said, "You cannot have it because it would go against Danny Day's, the false accuser's, human rights." That really upset her. Again, similar in my case. I was trying to get information on my case and my accuser, not only during the 3 years while I was on bail, but also after the case was dropped and I was cleared. But again, the police said, "Oh no, we can't hand you that." My case related to intelligence was received. My legal team thinks that intelligence was a human tip-off, and it relates to some trouble I had with some housemates at the time, which the police knew about, because I'd gone to the police several times beforehand and reported it. But they just didn't investigate the housemates, and they wouldn't let us have the information, the intelligence, which was the spark, which was the trigger for the police investigation of my arrest. Continuing, Mrs. Bryant's tireless detective work after her husband was jailed was a major factor in securing his release. I'm sure it was very stressful, having done several years of preparation of legal documents and fighting. It can be very debilitating and stressful. Evidence uncovered by Mrs. Bryant and her legal team showed Day, who had waived his right to anonymity, had sought medical help for compulsive lying. Rupert Butler, the Bryant's lawyer, who is bringing a claim against police on Mrs. Bryant's half, said in a moving tribute, "Lynn was a woman of incredible faith. When her world collapsed in 2012, she stayed true to her instincts and stuck by her hero Dave, knowing he was innocent, knowing that decision would cause her many problems. She suffered social isolation and attacks on her house, grueling journeys between Christchurch and Dartmoor for prison visits, and financial hardships, even having to sell her beloved jewellery that held so many happy memories." Mr. Butler added, when Dave's conviction was eventually quashed, it was as much down to her tenacity as anything else. She fought against the system in spite of formidable odds, and she won. What she really wanted was for Dorset Police to admit it had failed Dave and to apologise, but this has not happened. I have no doubt that the stress of these last 4 years of fighting tooth and nail took a considerable physical toll on Lynn that finally broke her body, but not her spirit. Let's move 12 months later to February 2018. Police wrongly pursued fire chief rather than investigate blackmail claim against fantasist who accused him of rape. So this is another element to the story. Police wrongly pursued a rape case against a retired fire chief rather than investigate a blackmail claim against the fantasist who made the allegation. David Bryant spent almost 3 years in jail after being convicted in a miscarriage of justice that further plunges into crisis the police handling of sex abuse cases. Mr. Bryant's conviction was overturned in the Court of Appeal, and now a High Court judge has raised serious questions over a police force's failure to investigate the accuser. A police inquiry began after Danny Day, who had sought medical help for compulsive lying, went to Dorset Police in 2012 claiming he had been raped by Mr. Bryant in a fire station. But before doing so, Mr. Day had posted a letter through Mr. Bryant's door threatening him to make him pay one way or another and demanding he telephone him or else he would go to the newspapers and to police. Mr. Bryant's wife Lynn, who subsequently died, her death blamed on the stress of the ordeal, immediately phoned police, so again this would be in 2012, alarmed by the threat, but her pleas were ignored. Surprise. Now in a High Court judgment, Master Gary Thornett has expressed his concern that officers pursued the rape case against Mr. Bryant rather than investigating Mr. Day for blackmail. In a written judgment, Master Thornett said, "This letter would not strike any reasonable person as anything other than a blackmail note. It is clearly threatening. The invitation to make contact seems well away from a need to discuss and elicit an apology, but instead seeks either a financial payment or retribution through the threat of police involvement and publicity." So again, to my case, I had gone to the police, I think it was 15 months. I was sharing a house and I had trouble with the housemates. I spoke to the police a few times about my housemates. I eventually got the housemates out of the house. It had been a very difficult time. And then 18 months later, the police knocked on my door saying they'd received information and an allegation and intelligence, and I was arrested. I'll deal with those in other cases. Now, Mr. Day, he's the false accuser, received £11,000 from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority for the rape, which never happened, which he has never had to pay back. Now, I think the amount has risen. I think it currently stands about a maximum of £22,000, I think, and there have been a series of cases where people have made allegations, claimed the money. There's a financial incentive to do this kind of thing, even though the case doesn't go to court, or if the case is thrown out, or it's found to be false. So this is something I will deal with in another video and has been dealt with by other people who've gone through similar situations. Continuing, and also Mr. Day, began a claim for damages from Mr. Bryant, the innocent fire chief, and also from Dorset Fire Services. Incredible. On his release, Mr. Bryant brought his own legal action against Mr. Day, the false accuser. The High Court ruled that Mr. Day had sought to undermine justice by making false allegations of sexual assault and had sought compensation by contriving an allegation that was false and fundamentally dishonest. Master Thornett's judgment also declared that Mr. Day had deliberately used the police and Crown Prosecution Service to wage a campaign of self-aggrandizement. The court ordered him to pay £20,000 of interim costs. Mr. Bryant told the Telegraph this ruling just shows how hopeless the police were. Instead of investigating Danny Day for blackmail, they investigated me for historic sex abuse. Lynn, his late wife, reported this as a blackmail threat, but they ignored it. This could have been cleared up in days, but instead I went to jail and my wife died from the stress of the ordeal. Again, my case, if the police had disclosed matters, we could have cleared it up within a few days and referred them to the difficulty that we had with the housemates. But instead, it dragged on for 3 years, and again, they still haven't disclosed information. Now, bear in mind, this is a few years later. The 35-page ruling will put huge pressure on Dorset Police to apologise to Mr. Bryant. The force has so far, again, this is several years after he was released, the force has so far refused to do so and didn't even bother to send a note of condolence when Mr. Bryant's wife died not long after his release. Shocking. Mr. Bryant's lawyer, Rupert Butler, said Mr. Bryant had got lucky that Mr. Day's, the false accuser's, lies were relatively easily exposed. If he, Day, had been a really good psychopath, Dave would still be in prison, said Mr. Butler. How many Daves are there wrongly locked up? I'm guessing it's in the hundreds. That's the scandal, and it is only getting worse. And I'm sure, I've no doubt, because I've been following various cases like this, that it is a real problem, that there will be lots of people who have been locked out for this kind of case. He said that Dorset Police had not only wreaked devastation on his client, but had also let down Mr. Day by failing to check his claims properly. They should never have let Day in the witness box with so little evidence or checking, and they have ruined his life. And of course the police don't respond to comments. So I hope that is a useful case study for you. I'm going to do a series of these videos highlighting cases of false allegations and also the police not performing properly. So hopefully this channel will develop as a resource for people who might be going through similar situations. I'll leave details of these links to these articles in the description below. Please subscribe, and if you're interested in helping me, then you can buy the books, obviously. You can find them on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. So they're titled Mad as Hell Parts 1 and 2 by David N. Anderson. But there's also, I'm setting up a Patreon account, so if you want to support me and help me try and knock out more videos, that'd be a great help. Okay, thank you.
Let's go.